Should we have done 2 of these? So fun to see the house full this morning. So just so you know how it works, because we kind of get just the local view here in San Francisco. So my friends who are pastors all around the country, they're texting me over the last few days saying, hey, I know you guys are doubling your amount of services you normally do, praying for stamina as you do your 7 or 9 or 11, because everywhere else in the country, just so you know, it's more like Easter at Christmas time. It just doesn't happen that way in San Francisco. So while I got a text from a friend this morning. He's like, Ben, I know you must be worn out from all of those services. Like, bro, I haven't even done one yet. And when I do one, I'm done. You know what I mean? So, like, for everybody else, they gear up at this time of year. Just the uniqueness of San Francisco. I guess or not a ton of people being from here and people not having homes big enough. It's hard to host your entire family and your cousins and grandparents in a studio apartment. And so nobody hosts Christmas here for the most part. And so everybody's gone. But this is really fun. And one of the reasons I'm just trying to take inventory here because typically we don't need to decide in June what we're going to do for next Christmas. We need to decide coming right out of Christmas. And so just for our team leaders, let's take note of this. Let's think through 2 Christmas Eves. But we have the dilemma next year. I've already looked at the calendar. I've been agonizing over it with my wife. Do we do Christmas Eve services in the morning? Do we do them in the evening? You get a vote, only because you're here. It's on a Sunday, just so you know. So that's what makes it a little bit different. Morning, just go like, hey, just normal Sunday morning thing. All right, evening. I tell you guys all the time, we're so diverse. Actually, we never vote on anything at Epic because of that reason, like anything, whether to keep the pastor. But hey, on a serious note, Merry Christmas from not only Epic Church, but from all of the 6 of my family, the Pilgreens. We wish you a Merry Christmas. I'm thrilled that you're here. If church is your normal thing and you do it in a different town most days, we're thrilled that you're here. If church isn't a normal thing, but you live here, we would love for you just to be a part of what's going on. You know, obviously a Christmas focus this morning, but pretty typical in terms of what the feel is like. We're a little more dressed up than we normally are. Brad tried to outdo me by wearing a tie. We'll work on that later, but we'd love for you guys to join us over January 1st, as well as when we get back into normal schedule of things on January the 8th. I really need to know who's going to pay attention this morning, so I've got to lead off with this question. How many of you have already exchanged gifts so far today? Cool. All right, how many of you still have to exchange gifts? That's coming, the gift giving opening. Keep those hands up high. I just need to know who's not going to be able to pay attention for the next 20 minutes or so. I'm with you. I'm thinking, pastor's family, like how do we give these kids, so we did the stocking thing this morning, and we still have gifts waiting, and they bribed me to make this a really short message, and so I'm going to oblige them and oblige you. But when it comes to gift giving, there are 4 questions that I think are really essential to answering anytime it comes to this time of year. And I know, hopefully, you've already answered those questions. But here's the 4 questions. The first question is, who all will you buy gifts for this year? Isn't that agonizing, unless you're selfish or Scrooge? Like, who all makes the list this year? I'm going to give you all kinds of free advice around gift giving this morning. The first piece of advice is just know that whoever you buy for this year, they will expect it next year. So just be smart. But who makes the list? Kids? Check, right? Spouse? Check. Parents? Check. You don't know what to get for your dad, but otherwise, he's getting something. And then you have to go to your close friends, check. And then if you have children, they're teachers, then they're church teachers. You're like, man, we should just not let them go to school or church, and we would have a lot less gifts to be able to buy. But then you have to go out from there. And here's the question I want to ask you. Wherever you cut the list off, what could that person who just missed the cutoff, what could they have done for you this year to make the list next year? I just want you to think about it. And here's the most awkward situation you end up in, and you know this. I'm going to see you show just your facial expressions. The most awkward thing that can happen is to receive a gift from someone who didn't make your... That's the worst. If you've got a lot of junk sitting around that looks new, you're okay. If you have enough time to order from Amazon Prime and it gets there before Christmas, you're okay. But what do you do with the person who gives you a gift and it's not just that they didn't make your list, you don't like them. You honestly just don't like them at all. What do you do with that? But we've got to figure out who's on the list. And the second question we have to ask is, what is the appropriate gift for the people on the list? Now, we have limited knowledge, which means we don't know everything that would be something they would want, nor do we know all that they might need. And we also have limited resources, so we have to figure out what is it we're going to get that individual. Anybody have someone that's just impossible on your list? No one. All of you are like, I'm easy. No one has so you just know a bunch of people who just have lots of desires, obviously, the rest of you guys. For me, I have people, and I just do not know what to get them. And so I've started buying them things that I really enjoy in case they give it back. If you don't know, you got to go with that. That's the only thing I know how to do. So you've got to figure out, who is it all going to be for? What are the gifts that you're going to purchase for those individuals on your list? The third thing you have to do is figure out how to pay for it. Now, some of you are wise, and you spend the entire year saving up for Christmas. Anybody this is where you get to be a little prideful, okay, at church, which is very rare. But if you save up all year, you actually have a Christmas account, anybody? No, this is good. The rest of us want to learn how. Okay, some of you have Christmas accounts. Some people work overtime during this time of year, or maybe even get a second part-time job. Some people just decide to go into debt, right? Why pay $30 for a sweater with cash when you can pay on it the next 12 months and it becomes a $130 sweater? Anybody? You're like, and then you tell them, no, it's not, it cost me a lot more than you think it did. $30 on the Gap price tag, really $130 by the time I pay it off in 2020. You know what I mean? And so we've got to figure out how to pay for it. But then the most challenging question for guys like me, at least, how in the world do you wrap it? I've got three options, at least as I see it. The first option I have is to ask the clerk at the store I purchased the item at to wrap it for me. In fact, here's some more free advice. Only buy Christmas gifts at stores that have clerks who will wrap it for you. And it doesn't matter what they charge, right? $9.99. Yep. $20. It does, just whatever. I just need you to wrap it for me. The second option is I could put it in a little bit larger box than the gift is itself and ask my wife to wrap her gift from me to her. The third option I have is to do my very best to wrap it and hope that on Christmas morning she's in one of those it's the thought that counts moods. But you've got to figure out those questions. Now, as we think about Christmas morning and the reality of Christmas, though you might wonder how I can get from that point to the point I'm about to make, I think the Christmas story is all about God answering those four questions. But I don't just think the Christmas story is about God answering those four questions. I think the entirety of our Christian faith comes from those four questions being answered by God himself. And so I want to just highlight a few ways God answered those questions, and then we'll look into John's Gospel this morning, chapter 1, if you're one of those people who needs to know where we're headed. But how does God answer the question, who would the gift be for? Even if you're not a church person, you remember this verse maybe, for God so loved the world that whosoever, depending on which version you learn. Anybody could. Whoever. The entire world would have access to the gift that he was going to bring to earth. Next question, of course, we asked was, how do you know what gift to get? And we said that we have limited knowledge and we have limited resources. God has all wisdom, all knowledge. He knows everything that exists. He brought it into existence. He has unlimited resources, meaning whatever it would take to pay for the gift he would give to those on that list we just mentioned, that he would be able to do it. Out of all the things he could think of, out of all the things he could purchase, he chooses to gift us with himself. Story of Emmanuel, God with us. And if you know how the story goes, not only did Jesus come as God with us, but when he left earth, he became God in us. And one day, for all eternity, it's going to be us with that God forever and ever and ever. Third thing we said is, how do you pay for it? How did God choose to pay for it? He chose to pay for it with the one life of his only Son, his only sinless Son. He would offer that so that later on writers would say things like this: he loved us and gave himself up for us. Paul said in Romans 8, I believe verse 32, he said, here's what you need to know about this gift God gave. If he did not spare his only Son, what else is he going to hold out on us with? So that we can look at the gift God has given, his ultimate gift, and say this: everything he has, if he's making that available, it must be true that he's made everything available to us. And then fourth, how would he wrap it? I know some of you are very creative rappers. Any creative rappers? And I'm talking about the Christmas kind. Although if you have a Christmas rap, Brad can get you on the mic up here. none of you hold a candle to the way God creatively wrapped his gift to us. In the tiny flesh of, a 7, perhaps 8-pound little baby boy who would be dependent on mere humans and would grow up, would continue to be perfect, and yet would be assumed as though he was the one who had sinned. And then he would go to the cross, and he would offer that life we just talked about for us. This is the reality of Christmas, but it's not just Christmas. So if this is the only time you hit a church this year, it's not just the reality of Christmas. It's the reality. It's the entirety of our faith. It's what makes Christianity distinctive from all other world religions. And no other world religion is a God choosing to be less than he actually is in representation and coming to human beings. Rather than asking humans to come up to where that God exists, this God comes down into where we are. So if you have a Bible, John chapter 1. If you need a Bible to follow along, or you can just watch the screen, but raise your hand if you want us to pass one out. This will be it. If you don't have any Christmas gifts, take one of these. John chapter 1, would you stand with me as I read verses 9 through 14? For those of you that are thinking, man, that's a long introduction, we're halfway there. So in the Bible, you get the timeline of the Christmas events when you combine Matthew's and Luke's gospel. So John doesn't give you the individual moments, but what he's giving you is the sweeping view of what Christmas actually entailed. So there's this really big 30,000-foot view that John's trying to give us about all that Matthew and Luke told us about in those moments with Mary and in those moments with Joseph and the shepherd and the wise men and whatever else we see in those gospels. John's saying, here's what was happening, and here's what he says. He writes that the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, the name we just sang about, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. You may be seated. Jesus steps into our darkness to bring us into his light. He steps into our chaos, into our hopelessness, into our desperation, into our confusion. Ultimately, he literally steps into our sin. He enters our darkness so that he might bring us into his light. And here's the good news for us, not just for this morning, but for every day. You don't have to earn your way out of the darkness. And you don't have to find yourself yet on the nice list. It's not like those on the nice list can bring themselves into the light, and those on the naughty list have to stay in the darkness forever. In fact, in Romans chapter 3, Paul says that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if we stopped there, if there was a period over our lives there, we would be hopeless. But the gospel message goes on to tell us that it doesn't stop there. No matter how bad you are off, no matter how dark the darkness is that you find yourself in the midst of, that what Jesus has done for us, it's able to rescue and deliver and save even you. No matter what the addiction looks like, no matter what ways you've cursed God with your life and with your words, no matter which ways you've walked out on your commitments to other human beings, no matter which ways you've been selfish and so self-absorbed that your life has rotated around you and you've demanded that everyone in your life revolve their life around you, no matter how dark your darkness is, it doesn't matter. Jesus steps fully into the darkness to bring us completely into his light. So much so that Peter would write these words to Christians in the first century to let them understand exactly what was taking place with not only the message of Christmas, but the message that begins at Christmas leading up to Easter and the resurrection itself. Here's what Peter said about those who step into this light. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light, or wonderful light. that God wants to put a new tag on your life, that he wants to bring a new identity to bear in your life. So no matter how deep you are, no matter how dark it is, Jesus has come and he's entered into your world so that you might enter into his world. That's the entire point. But one of the things that John is telling us is that even though Jesus came to be light for everyone, not everyone received what he had to offer. You see it in the text in John 1 when it says that he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. He came to the people that he had created, literally with his fingers had created, spoken to existence with the Father at the moment of creation, and he comes to them, he shows up to them, and the people you might think would receive him are the ones who actually reject him. And here's the deal with a gift. You know this to be true already. For a gift to impact its recipient, it must be received and experienced. For any gift, you know this today. For any gift that you've given to someone, for them to get the most out of it, for them to benefit from whatever the gift is able to do, they have to not only receive it, but they have to step into it. They have to experience it. And John goes on to say, not only did many reject him, but to those who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. You see, we sing about the wonder of this child. But what God is doing in becoming this infant little boy is he's beginning to make a way for the sons and daughters of God to become fully that. He's beginning to usher in the possibility that no matter what your parents have done or haven't done for you, no matter what the people that should love you the most, what they have done to you, he's ushering in the possibility for you to actually be a daughter or son of the God of the universe. In fact, Paul wrote to the Galatians, and you guys hear me quote this one a lot, but when Paul writes this in Galatians 4, 4, and 5, what he's doing is referring to that Christmas moment, and he says these words, "But when the set time had fully come," who knows why Christmas came when it did? We don't know all of those answers that God knows. But when the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Why? So we could sing Silent Night. Away in a manger. Born under the law. Why? So that he might redeem those who are under the law, that we might what? What's the word? Receive. Receive adoption to sonship. Why Christmas? All about a gift. All about a very creative gift. You see, God was writing himself into our story so that he might write us into his story. And even though we hear this maybe the same message, or one of the challenging things to do as a pastor is figure out, how do you make it new this year? I don't know that we need to make it new, but I do think we need to experience it anew. When the fullness of time had come at just the right set time, God sent, God gave. And he was so creative that he allowed his one and only spotless, sinless son, perfect son, to be born of a woman, to actually be born under the law, to put himself under the law. The law, ultimate lawgiver, now has to abide by the laws of mankind. The one who wasn't dependent on anyone is now dependent on a mom and dad. The one who spoke the world into existence now can barely echo a cry. That's the one. All the ways God could have written himself into this story, he chose this majestic way so that we say, God, you have made it possible for me not to stay in darkness, but for me to come to light. Jesus enters our darkness so that we could enter his light. He enters our sin so that we can taste forgiveness. He enters our death so we can know his life. He enters our despair so that we can know his hope. He enters our sorrow so that we can know his joy. But here's what I know to be true. In this season, like every season of life, because of just what it means to be human, there are some longings that we all have in this room. But I just want to ask you this question. What if what you're longing for most isn't actually out of reach? What if it's simply waiting to be received and believed in? I want to ask you to pray with me, and I want to lead you into a response time. As we think about all that Christmas is, that it wouldn't just be about presents, that it wouldn't just be about even coming and doing the church thing like we do each year. If you've never allowed Jesus to personally enter your darkness and bring you into his light, but you would be really interested in asking him to do that today, I want to ask you just to raise your hand. I would love to pray for you, especially this morning. You would just be in the space this morning and you would say, you know what, I've never I've heard things like this, but I've never actually stepped into it. It's like there are two things that seem primary in the text from John. One is that you must receive what Christ has done. The second is that you must anchor your faith and your trust to who Jesus is as not only Savior for you, but Lord. So if you'd want to do that this morning, just lift a hand. I want to pray for you. And you can just say a prayer like this. Jesus, thank you for entering my darkness. Thank you for bringing me into your light. Thank you for entering my sin ultimately on the cross so that I might receive forgiveness. And Jesus, today I receive that forgiveness. I receive the life that you came to give me, and I want to live in that eternal life. God, in this moment, I pray before we move out and head into travel this week and opening gifts and enjoying great food later on, help us be the kind of people who receive what you've done for us. It's not enough for you to have stepped into our darkness. We must allow you to take us into your light. Jesus, thank you so much for leaving a throne, entering into human flesh in a small form, growing up, not retaliating when you were accused of something you didn't do. Thank you for staying on the cross when you could have removed yourself. Also, that we might become sons and daughters. We can scarcely believe that it's true. And yet we want to step into it this morning. In your name, Lord. Amen. I want to ask you to stand. Brad and the team are going to lead us in just a worship song that ends up telling us, as we behold this infant Messiah, come and worship. And if you haven't done that all year, if you haven't done it yet this morning, when you see the fact that Jesus becomes an infant son so that he might make us sons and daughters, receive it. And what if we anchored our entire life to the reality that God has answered the Christmas questions? Whosoever would come to me. I give the gift of myself. I pay for it with the one precious life, my only son. I wrapped him in human flesh. I entered your story so that you might be able to enter mine. But you've got to step into the light.